In this video, I'm going to share some long stitch design ideas that you can create on a double bed knitting machine. You might have seen some videos with long stitch designs on this channel, and if you haven't, I will leave some links in the description down below if you want to check them out. But all the designs that I showed before are on single bed. The other day I realized you can create really cool samples on double bed using the same technique, and I will share that with you. So right now I have a 4x4 rib, which means I have 4 needles in action on main bed, 4 needles in action on ribbon bed across. I have knitted a couple of rows in a 4x4 rib, and now I will just remove the yarn from my yarn feeder. I will begin pushing needles on main bed only, so I will push the needles all the way out. And I will push needles back again, so just enough that the latches are in alignment with the gate pegs. I'm also making sure that the latches are staying open. Lay the yarn on top of the needles, just like so. Push the needles back just enough so that the yarn gets trapped in the hooks of the needles and the latches are closed, but I'm not completing the stitch at this point. I have a loose tension. Beginning from the opposite end where the yarn is, form a long stitch, just like so. So I'm doing it one stitch at a time. Putting needles all the way out. Pushing them back just enough so that the latches are in alignment with the gate pegs, ensuring that the latches are still staying open. We'll lay the yarn on top of the hooks. Push the needles just enough so that we're trapping the yarn without completing the stitch. The latches are closed now. And just like we did on the other side, we're manually knitting a long stitch, pulling the needle all the way to the back. This might be a bit tricky as the yarn might get caught in the gate pegs. Just be careful and try to hold it out of the way with the other hand. I'm putting the yarn back into my yarn feeder and pulling the sample from underneath so that the needles come back in the normal working position. And now I can just knit rows with my carriage. If you want to make sure that the needles are completing the stitch properly, you can pull the needles all the way out, but I found that that doesn't really happen as long as I have enough weight on my comb. And I knitted 2 rows. So now we have knit and purl stitches on our sample after we've knitted the long stitches. Also having a rib, the sample pulls in a nice way and that creates a nice effect as well. I have 2 cones of yarn which I placed on the floor in front of me. So I've got the yarn like so, and I'm going to place the tail of the yarn in between the beds and just tie it under the machine. We'll repeat the same process just like I did before using the teal yarn. I'm going to pull the needles on main bed all the way out. Take the yarn and place it in between the beds so it's out of the way. We'll grab the other yarn and again place the tail through the beds and wrap it under the machine. If you ever feel too much resistance when you're knitting long stitches, you might have pulled the needles too much backwards, so try pushing them a bit back to see if that improves. I will again place the yarn in between the beds so it's out of the way. We'll put the sample downwards so that the needles come back in the normal working position, just like so. And I will knit 3 rows with my carriage. So right now the yarns that I've used are on the left side of the machine, and so is the carriage. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab the 2 yarns. So I've grabbed the 2 yarns and I'm going to just push this little knob on the carriage to release it so I can just move the yarn. And I'll continue the same. I will manually knit a long stitch on main bed first using the teal yarn. I will grab the 2 ends of the yarn and place them on the right side of the machine this time, in between the beds. We'll pull the sample down so that the needles come back in normal position. We'll knit again 3 rows. And the carriage came back on the right side where the end of the yarn is as well. So I find it easier to begin forming a long stitch from the side where the carriage is. So now again I'm going to grab the 2 ends from between the beds and I'm bringing them through my carriage like so, ready to knit with, and I'm forming a long stitch from right to left. And then when I finish the long stitch, I can easily place the yarn in between the beds and the carriage is not in the way when I do that. This is just how I did it and how I found it easier for me, but of course you can do this however you want. This is just how I did it and I wanted to share that with you. Here is a sample just as I've taken it off the machine. I think it's really cool. I love how the rib pulls in the long stitches, but of course once I give this a little steam it will be nice and flat. You can see here how these are the stitches where we have the floats and here is where we've caught the floats. It's entirely up to you if you choose to catch the floats or not. This is the other side. You could alternate these rows. For example, I could have knitted 1 row of long stitches on main bed with a teal yarn, and then for the next row just swap the yarns and do a long stitch using the teal yarn on a ribbon bed and the other way around. This is just another idea on how you can develop this stitch further. You can choose to do, you can see how I'm using 2 different yarns, but you can choose to use 2 different thicknesses and so forth. You can also manipulate the long stitches as well. I might come up with a new tutorial for this stitch because this is really, really exciting. You can see here the first row that we've done using the yarn that I had in my yarn feeder. Here is a sample after I gave it a little bit of a steam. I think I prefer this side as I like when we're changing the stripes here, the effect that we're creating is a bit more obvious than the other side.